Hello, everyone. We're back with the To Be and Do podcast, where we talk about the importance of interdependence and not just independence, where we talk about the importance of weaving new connections among people, about building bridges. And boy, do I have a wonderful guest to help us with that today. Dr. Javon Caldwell Gross is, well, he's many, many things. I don't know where to start, whether a great preacher, author, professor, consultant. Javon, where do I begin to talk? Well, I know your current role, if I've got it right, is Director of Revitalization and Church Development for the Indiana Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Can you get all that on one business card?
We have tried, and it does fit. Surprisingly, it did. It was a topic of conversation. True story. True
That's
story.
great. Well, tell us about yourself and your family. I know you are married. You're one of those fortunate people that has a preacher for a spouse. So
That is
tell us
correct.
about
That
your
is correct.
family.
Yeah, so my wife and I, Nicole Caldwell Gross, she is the senior pastor of Noblesville First United Methodist Church. And we've been in the Indiana Conference for 7 years thus far. We started off in the New Jersey Conference, and we were there for, man, around 12 or 13 years. She was the director of missions and outreach, and I was in the local church. And now we have switched roles. Now I'm with the conference, and now she's at a local church. But we also spent 7 years together at St. Luke's United Methodist Church, located right here in Indianapolis. So
Right.
our ministry journey has taken us to different cities and different places, and here we are.
Wow. Well, and I left out all of your remarkable education work. I know I think you did your DMin at Wesley Seminary and then
Yeah,
seminary at Princeton, I think,
I did.
and you went to this little school up in
That's right.
Michigan,
That's
K
right.
College. Well, I mean Kalamazoo College.
Kalamazoo College. That's
And
correct.
as I told you recently, my grandson hopes to graduate from K
That's right.
College in May. What a small
That's
world.
right. Small world. Small world.
Yeah. And it's a remarkable, well, all of those institutions are really fine schools. But we were talking a bit about K College and the transformation you saw there in recent times.
So Kalamazoo College, let me just say this. It was such a formative experience, me growing up in terms of in ministry and even shaping me who I am as a person. It's a very academically rigorous place. And I've always believed in terms of my own ministry of how to apply that in my own work, as a theologian, as a writer, as a thinker. But one of the ways that it's also shaped me is really in terms of leadership. So as a student there, Kalamazoo College was a um, predominantly small white liberal arts college. And again, highly rigorous, great reputation. Um, but what was interesting was that after I, um, left Kalamazoo College, they invited me to come on to be a part of the board, and
Wow.
they gave me a totally different insight into um, education, especially higher education, um, because there's a part that you learn as a student, and then there's another part that you learn, right? Gave me a great understanding. But it gave me a front row seat to one of the greatest examples of transformational leadership that I've ever been a part of. Our leader at the time was Dr. Wilson Oyularen, and through research and through surveys, we found that many of our white students actually did not want to be a part of a homogeneous environment as it related to their learning, that they wanted to be in a more diverse environment. And so Dr. Wilson O. Dr. Wilson O'Ularen invited us to think about if we're creating leaders for an ever-changing world, then in order to prepare all of our students to be effective leaders out in the world, they needed to learn how to do that in an environment that represented the world in which we lived. And so
Great.
we made efforts to um, make the college more diverse, not just for the sake of diversity, but for the sake of our mission and our vision. And what's interesting is that, again, this was almost 20 years ago. The same language that we hear now around those same values was, and again, this is 20 years ago, because the fear of a predominantly white liberal arts college that was academically rigorous committing to diversity was synonymous with lowering its standards. And it was interesting kind of hearing people's, again, this was 20 years ago. And so watching Dr. Wilson Oyularen as a transformational leader, first extend the college's recruiting efforts to communities that it never went to, because it didn't go to those communities because it was believed that people in different communities could not handle the academic rigor of a Kalamazoo College. And so she reshaped the narrative in terms of these are great students everywhere.
Yes.
And it's our job to at least start off believing in them. And so we created relationships with different high schools. We had donors who were willing to give to support the students once they got on campus. We changed even how professors received tenure, that they had to do their research that represented the diversity in the academic field in which they studied, whether if it was biology, math, or business. She wanted to see that you were culturally competent, holistically, in the academic area that you studied. We changed the kind of food that we offered in the cafeteria. She changed the people who were working security. I mean, in the entire. Now. Here's the thing about it. I remember going back as a board member, and I remember thinking, this is not the same Kalamazoo College that I remembered. But then I remember thinking, but that's a good thing, because the college had changed and evolved into this beautiful place where people from literally all around the world came to receive this academic education, and to see a person whose vision and to see it through. Because sometimes people's fear of any kind of diversity is that things won't be the same, but that's not always a bad thing,
Yeah.
because if anything is to grow and evolve, even as people,
Yeah.
we grow and evolve. I have a lot more gray than I did 5 years ago, right?
Now, wait a
But
minute.
yeah,
Don't
right,
talk
yeah.
about gray.
But 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 just because I've changed and evolved, it doesn't mean that there's been a process of devaluing what was there. But every institution, whether if it's the church or the academy, or our communities, I think a lot of it is behind it is the fear of change, as opposed to looking at the possibilities of evolution. And
Yeah.
so I just witnessed a great transformation leader.
We need to tell those stories and remind ourselves of it. I I won't take a lot of time right now, but a similar evolution occurred at Garrett Evangelical Seminary back in the mid 1950s. There was a faculty member who later became a wonderful bishop, Edsel Ammons.
Okay.
And Bishop Ammons was on the faculty, and the faculty joined him in a faculty strike until we do something about the racism that this school needs to address. The short version of a much longer story is that something was begun there called the Center for the Church and the Black Experience. And
Yes.
among the graduates that came along was a little fellow named James Cone, wonderful man,
Wow.
who
Yes.
was the father of really Black theology, modern
Yes.
Black theology,
Yeah.
and a fellow you and I both know, Carlisle Stewart, came through that.
Yes.
As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, Dr. Carlisle Stewart is representative of so much of the good that came out of that time when Garrett said, "Enough. We're going to stop." And as you say, excellence was only increased. It wasn't There
Yes.
wasn't a
Yeah,
damage.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I
So,
love that.
what a, we need to tell those stories more often.
Yeah, we do. And you said a great phrase, excellence is increased. And
Yes.
those are the stories we don't tell. That's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
great, Phil.
So tell me a little bit. I know you've done well. I left out a videographer, or at least a storyteller on film. Um, Tell me some about how that's evolved and what you've learned in that. And by the way, folks, if you're listening, just go to YouTube or other places and type in his name, and you'll get a dozen, 2 dozen options to hear some good preaching.
No, in terms of, so most of the work that I do, and I heard a preacher say this, but even though we might be in different fields, most of us have a couple of different gifts that we operate in. And, whether, especially as a, preacher, pastor, whether I'm writing or doing videos, or I'm really just communicating. And so one of the really joys that I get is storytelling.
Yeah.
And while I was at St. Luke's, we did this as sort of an innovative. Now, I don't even say innovative. It was innovative for us. Is that part of my role was the second preacher on staff, which just meant whenever Pastor Rob was not available, I would be the one called to, stand in his place. But we also looked at what are some of the other ways that we might be able to tell different stories or to tell the gospel in different ways, just by using video. So it didn't have to be on a Sunday morning. It could be around Advent. It could be around something happening in our nation. One of the most watched and shared videos we did was my responding to how it felt as a Black leader in a predominantly white environment after George Floyd was murdered. And so, again, it wasn't something that I preached on a Sunday morning, but here's a way for us to communicate and to tell a story. And so that's just been one of my passions, is just finding creative ways to tell stories, whether that's through writing or through being a professor or through consulting. It's really all just about storytelling for me.
Well, I almost introduced you as Pastor Jay, uh, or look for his reels,
Yeah.
but but you just mentioned your book. I think it's Not Just Sunday.
Not just
Uh,
Sunday.
tell us a little. It's out now. People can get it,
Yeah, so this was something I've been working on for
and it's
probably
one of
about.
many books, by the way.
Yeah, but this is my first solo one. And man, it was a journey writing it, but it was a joy because it was really based on research that I looked at through St. Luke's, and whether through consulting, working with other conferences, and really looking at most churches are geared and put most of their resources towards Sunday morning, whether if it's volunteer resources, financial resources, people resources. And yet, when we look at the data, most people, especially new people, they're getting connected to our churches outside of Sunday morning,
Right.
and how people are developing and growing their faith. We ask the question, where have your most transformative experience with God been? And I've been in several different environments, and rarely will people say it's been on Sunday morning. They say all of these other things, right?
Watch
They
out!
say,
Watch out!
well, yeah, that's, when they say when I go camping, or when I'm out in nature, or with
Yeah.
so and so, they say, okay, so you mean to tell me that we're creating and using all of our resources around places where people are not having their most transformative experiences? So the book really begins with the question is, how do we use people's everyday lives as places of transformation and discipleship? And it really looks at how do we help people find God and experience church and community, for the other 164 hours of the week.
There
And
you go.
so, and again, it's very practical. and it's meant for leaders in churches to use as groups, and not just individual studies. No, let's share it with common language, so that as a congregation you can move together with some common language and some common alignment.
That's great. Well, I remember not long ago I saw one of your reels, your videos from a soccer match, a soccer game.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
That's right. Because for instance, so we have three kids, and we spend most of our time in cars and at the soccer fields. And what do most churches say? What we can't get young people. We can't get young people. That is the growing thing out now. But when I was at the soccer field, I'm it was packed. It was packed with young families and young kids. The parking lot was packed. So now we have to ask the question: how can we be present as hundreds of families are in their cars parked at soccer fields? Instead of just asking, how do we get them in the parking lot from the soccer
Yeah,
field to the parking lot
yeah.
of the church, right? That's the how about you first meet them where they are? So what are the things that you might be able to do and to ask, and how do you be present there, whether through a podcast or some other way where you can make some kind of connection with them in the parking
Mm.
lot. Everybody's trying to figure out, how do we get them there? No, you figure out as a church, how do you get there? Like that's the real question of discipleship, and that's the real question of being, right? How do we be the church outside of Sunday morning?
Yeah, one of our friends is Michael Mather, who's now the pastor in Boulder, First
Mhm.
United Methodist, and he
Yep.
changed the benediction to no longer say "Go take Christ into the world," but to say "Go discover what Christ is already doing in the world all
That's
around
right. That's right. I love that. I
you."
love
Yep,
that. I love that. But it's a countercultural way of how we understand the church, and it's a
right.
countercultural way of how people experience faith, and especially how the church, how can we be present in the world? Even when I talk about what it means to be a volunteer, in terms of how can you equip people to go out into the places they're already going. you know they're already going to work on Monday morning. They're already going to these places. How do you help them live out the gospel and live out your values and beliefs in those places before you ask them to sign up for another thing? Help them to live as disciples of Jesus Christ in the places where they already are. Start there first.
Uh, Well, our time has just slid by too quickly, but good on us because we have another one we're going to record. So we're going to
Absolutely.
talk with Dr. Caldwell Gross more about his work in revitalization and his theology. He's already started down the road, but I know he's got a lot more to say about his theology of the church and evangelism. And so, thank you, Javon. Wonderful visiting with you, and we'll be back in the next episode to talk with Dr. Caldwell Gross. And for now, this is Phil Amerson encouraging you to find ways to discover where Christ is already at work in the world and make that a piece of understanding our belonging together at God's table with all people. God bless and so long for now.